morning, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me a great pleasure and privilege to introduce our plenary keynote speaker, Dr. Eric Topol, a top physician scientist in the world. Dr. Topol was the chairman of cardiovascular medicine at Cleveland Clinic, where he established the Lerner College of Medicine and made Cleveland Clinic the top heart care center in the world. He led many worldwide clinical trials to advance care for heart disease. He spearheaded the discovery of many genes relevant to heart attack, and he pioneered the development of many medications used in clinical practice today. We at La Jolla are very fortunate to have Dr. Topol coming here in 2007 to become the Chief Academic Officer of Scripps Health and Professor of Genomics at the Scripps Research Institute. He leads the flagship NIH-supported program on Scripps Translational Science Institute. Dr. Topol is a member of the Institute of Medicine of the National Academy of Sciences, and he has received numerous awards and honors. Last year, he received the Hutchinson Medal from his medical school alma mater, University of Rochester. At the University of Michigan, a chair was established in the name of Dr. Topol, Dr. Topol's Cardiovascular Medicine Chair. He was named by the Institute of Scientific Information as one of the doctors of the decade. The GQ magazine and Geoffrey Bean Foundation selected him as one of the inaugural rock stars of science. He was also chosen by Modern Healthcare as one of the most influential people in healthcare. Dr. Topol has published over 1,000 excellent papers in peer-reviewed journals and over 30 books. Earlier this year, he published a book on the creative destruction of medicine, how the digital revolution will create better health care, which is a public version of his outstanding pioneering work in this area. His outstanding work in these areas undoubtedly will shape the future of medicine and health care, as we'll learn from his keynote lecture on digitizing human beings, a new medicine. Let us give a warm welcome to Dr. Topol to give his plenary keynote speech.
I appreciate it, yes. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Hsu and Dr. Koo, for inviting me to join you at your annual program, and it's really a delight to meet so many of the engineers who are shaping the future of medicine, and clearly that collaboration between engineering and medicine is pivotal, as we'll be reviewing, to how we can really take the next quantum jump in rendering care, preventing diseases in the future. So I'm going to be talking about this concept of digitizing human beings, and that may seem like a somewhat far-reaching one, but we're already doing it, as I hope I'll be able to convey. The first thing I want to do is find out how many of you are on Twitter here. Not too many. Well, I just want to assure you that's where I get my best information. And most of the things that are very topical, the first I'll review with you this morning, actually the first I saw was on Twitter. So I'd recommend that as a great conduit for exchange of new ideas and sharing of research findings. This term of creative destruction and this whole concept that we need to go to a whole new way of innovation in medicine, I borrowed from Schumpeter from the last century, a noted Austrian economist, who actually used this to apply to the transition from an old economy to a new one, and he felt that could only occur with this radical innovation. And that's what we need in medicine. I think you'll agree we have a lot of issues and problems in medicine. Some of them have been addressed by biomedical engineering advances, but there's so many more that can be met in the years ahead. This will only occur when we take this digital world, which has largely been very much insulated in a separate orbit from the medical world, a microcosm, if you will, and when this is achieving true convergence, this is when it gives us this noted new capability of digitizing a man and having precision in the way we administer therapies or preventive strategies. And so, first I want to review with you this digital side of what is occurring in the last decade, because it's only in the last decade where these just extraordinary advances have started to occur. And essentially, we're all just trillions of 0-1s and ACTGs, and this is what is really becoming for the essence of what makes an individual biologically, physiologically, anatomically become more and more apparent. So let's just talk about some of the things that happened in the past decade that have been so transformative and have set the foundation for this radical change in medicine. Well, first of all, there's a lot of cell phones out there, over 6 billion, and there's more cell phones than there are toilets or toothbrushes in the world. So that's a pretty striking fact in itself. But these little devices that all of you are carrying and rely upon and are essentially surgically connected to, they changed our lives. And they did it in a very rapid time frame. 2001, the iPod, and then followed quickly by BlackBerry, smartphones, e-readers, and then most recently tablets. And that all occurred in the span of 9 years. And that has had an extraordinary impact on our daily lives. It's changed the way we process information. We now have to have lots of different screens at any one particular time. And it's certainly, by many criteria, we've evolved to a new species of man, known as Homo distractus. And as I look around, I don't see so many people yet looking at their smartphones or tablets, but we'll see how we do over the next 40 minutes or so. What's interesting is that there's also here the family of Homo distractus on vacation. And then it starts at a very young age, as you see here. And I thought that was fairly young, but then I saw this, it says, OMG, I was just born. I thought that was young, and then I noted this one as well. So this is affecting our digital lives in a very profound way. And of course, it's not just about the little devices, but now the connection of the little devices to social networking. And a Facebook, which will reach soon, sometime about 1 billion registrants. It's extraordinary, the impact that social networking is having. And then this one I already touched on in the opening comment, but this is now over 300 million per day, and those are tweets. And that's growing also at an exponential rate. So we have all these different social networks, and what they're doing and why it's important, because it's going to also be a big part of changing medicine in the future. It's a worldwide phenomenon. It's not just the top line here of Facebook, Google+, and Twitter, but all over the world there are specific social networks that bring people together and empower them and set up this opportunity of banning people like never before. So things like the Arab Spring and this kind of revolutionary potential, which could be applied to the medical space. But it already is showing up with respect to these online health communities, like Patients Like Me, and Cure Together, and so many others. And what's fascinating here is that patients with a chronic condition can go to the site and find a virtual peer who they then rely on and trust more than their doctor. Now, what's fascinating about this is so many patients, cumulatively millions of patients, are using these online health networks. And what's interesting is so many of them trust their peers with like conditions more than their doctors. But when doctors are asked, as they were recently, 4,000 of them, whether they know anything about, have ever heard of these social networks, and only 11% had even heard of them, even though so many of their patients are using them on a daily or frequent basis. That shows you the gap of the digital world and the medical world. Now, the other thing that you're very familiar with and dealing with is the extraordinary jump in the data that is now being generated. And we're now, of course, in this zettabyte era, and we have moved from only having 1 billion gigabytes to 2003, and now generating trillions of gigabytes on an annual basis. This is an extraordinary challenge to be able to deal with this big data. And so what's, of course, very interesting here is the fact that supercomputers are evolving like Watson, and the idea that it could save a life. And of course, what was interesting is one of the largest health insurers has already tapped WellPoint, Watson, for using this for diagnosis of very difficult, challenging patients. And cancer centers like Sloan Kettering are also using Watson for dealing with the genomic relationship and drug therapy for individual patients with cancer. Well, this cloud thing is the other part besides supercomputing that is changing the face of dealing with big data. And there's things like this article, the cloud will cure cancer. I'm not so sure about that, but of course a lot of assertions about the cloud, it's everywhere. And then there's these sorts of things like the check is in the cloud, and it was much nicer before people started storing all their personal information in the cloud. Well, when we put all this together, this digital infrastructure, what you can see is it really started in many respects with the cell phone back in '73, followed very quickly by personal computer, the internet. There was kind of a lag then until these digital devices showed up, these portable mini devices. Sequencing we're going to touch on because it's also part of the story and especially important. Social networks, which I don't think anyone would have forecasted would have this impact like it's having and will have. And then cloud and supercomputing setting up this remarkable great inflection of medicine, which we're just starting to get into now. Now, just to give you an example of one thing, which is, I think, emblematic of the changes that are occurring. What about the book, the hard copy book? How many of you still predominantly, when you're reading a book, rely on a hard copy here? Wow, that's interesting, most. No wonder you're not on Twitter. Okay, that's very interesting. Well, you know, the rest of the world is actually migrating to e-books predominantly, but that's okay, I know. Now, what's interesting is there's been pronouncements about the hard copy book is dead. And then what was really interesting is my friend and colleague George Church, you probably read about this just a little over a week ago. They published the first book stored in DNA. And in that little tube there in this slide, there's several billion copies of this book, Regenesis, which isn't even out yet, but it's a book about synthetic biology. So it's kind of really interesting convergence of DNA storage with big data and books. And I don't know that books may morph, but of course they'll never die. But what's really interesting to me, I did my cardiology training at Johns Hopkins, and I lived in this place off and on over a 3-year period, the Welsh Medical Library, the second largest medical library in the United States. And guess what? It's closed. Closed as of this past January because no one was using it. And so they couldn't afford to keep it open any longer. So I hope that that in itself conveys that we have this is a nice cartoon, the island of creative destruction, all these things that are basically becoming anachronistic. Our world is being Schumpetered, a new verb. We talk about it, Googled, well, now we got Schumpetered. And so that's what sets up remarkable opportunities in the medical space. So now let's talk about squeezing out the doctor. There's the idea that we need algorithms, not doctors, and that there's all these new devices that can help supplement the care of individuals with partnership of doctors. So this will occur when we shift in our idea that we today treat all people essentially the same. We recommend mass screening. We use the same drug for the same condition at the same dose for all the people with that condition. That's not intelligent. That's population medicine. What we want to be is individual focus, have all the critical knowledge of each individual so that we can provide medicine in a precise way, which we haven't really had the tools to do until now. So how did this era get started? Well, the Nike Plus shoe, and then these wireless accelerometers, most recently Fuel Band, but also things like Fitbit and Jawbone and Body Media, they started to capture health-related information, movement and steps and that sort of thing. But then came the ability to track your own brainwaves through your phone. And this device was very interesting because you can put the brainwaves during sleep onto your phone or right on a clock at your nightstand. And I've been trying this out, and it's very interesting. You get a sleep pattern like this on your phone or on this clock on your nightstand. And it has every minute of sleep, what phase of sleep through your headband that has sensors to capture your EEG. And what's interesting here is you see these orange bars are the times you're awake. You don't even know you're awake certain times during the night. The light gray bars is the light sleep, which isn't really of much value. The light green. Then the gray is the REM sleep, and then finally the deep green, dark green is the deep restorative sleep. So I'm using this, and of course what was interesting for me, learning something right away, my wife is a night owl. She comes to bed after me. She looks at the clock and she says, "Eric, I know you're awake and I want to talk." So that was very educational. I didn't realize it could be used like that. What was even more interesting, perhaps, was that you then get the data on oneself and you can compare it to thousands, tens of thousands of peers in your age group. And just think, that's what we're going to be doing with blood pressure and glucose and all the other metrics of man. This is just an early look at what you can do, and you can say, well, gee, I thought I was not a very good sleeper, and then I have all this data from 10,000 people in my age group to look at each particular variable. Now these sleep devices monitoring brainwaves are being used by athletes. In fact, they were used by most of the US bicycling team in the Olympics in London. And also by triathletes, and 3 NBA teams use them every night during the NBA season. And it's becoming a big thing among pro athletes. And this is a graph that compiles the sleep duration data from all the pro athletes, well-known pro athletes. So what's really fascinating is the king of sleep is LeBron James. And this is quite striking. He averages 12 hours of sleep per night. Perhaps that was the reason why it was so difficult for them to win the playoffs. And now, what was also interesting is the pro athlete with the absolute least sleep, averaging less than 4 hours a night, is Tiger Woods, and I won't comment any further on that. Now, we move from sleep to all these different wireless sensors that can pick up everything from fertility to for couples that are having hard time for conceiving, to basically, this is a Fast Company review, which is many months ago, and this has now been tripled by the number of devices that are out there for individuals today. And I'm just going to touch on some of them. Like, for example, as a cardiologist, I frequently recommend the app, either iHealth or Withings, because patients can take their blood pressure through their phone. And they love it because they hit start and then it's all archived and graphed. They can send it to me, hundreds of blood pressures. I had a hard time getting a couple of blood pressures before. Now I can get an extraordinary number of them. The same thing for glucose with things like IBG Star and the TelCare device. So these are still requiring active pressing a button, but at least they're getting a lot more data and it's all being stored and graphed and very nicely sendable. You know the world's changing when Apple stores are selling devices to get your glucose, an ad to your iPhone to get your glucose. That's this IBG Star. So that ought to be, if anything, a sign that the world is changing fairly rapidly. Then, of course, there's ways to do continuous glucose, and I have a device, you probably won't be able to see it, but I have a sensor on my abdomen, just like in this picture here, and I can just press open up my phone, and at 11:26, and I can say my glucose at this moment is 94. Every minute is updated, right on my phone. And you think that can change your lifestyle. Well, if you're looking at a cookie or something you shouldn't be eating and you're always looking at your phone, it changes everything when you know how your glucose and pancreas is likely to respond. Now, this is really interesting. This is the phone that changes into a cardiogram. And if we could just switch to this device, this is actually my iPhone here. And let me just turn it on and pull up this. It has a case on the back with 2 sensors. We've got it connected to the monitor. And I'm going to just pull up this app. Yep, you got my passcode. Okay. And I'm going to put my fingers on this give you my cardiogram. We lost the display. Okay, maybe we'll get it now. Here we go. Now it's a little, now it's not the best signal, okay? It could be better. It's a little noise. So what I'm going to do now is I got this little credit card version of this, and I'm going to put that right on my chest, and hopefully we're going to get a much better signal. Okay. Of course, I had this working beautifully in the, Well, I won't spend too much extra time, but that's where you get a great EKG. And don't know why. Oh, I lost the display again. That's it. Here we go. Can you put the display back up? Okay. There you go. Pretty nice, isn't it? For those used to looking at a cardiogram. That's how I was able to diagnose a heart attack on a plane some months ago with this little device. I never thought I'd be able to do that. Never even thought it would ever come up, but it's pretty striking capability using your phone as a cardiogram. And you can get all your vital signs on your phone before long. And so we'll be able to wear little devices like this on your wrist, and it'll get all these things: continuous blood pressure, your cardiogram, oximetry, and respiratory rate, body temperature. It'll look like this right on your phone. You'll be checking your email, checking the web, and then checking all your vital signs and saying, oh. And this is real cyberchondria, folks, but that's what's coming. Okay, what about being able to take a picture of a skin lesion and getting that all automatic algorithm detected, whether it's something to worry about, get a biopsy or not? What about having your eyes refracted with this device from MIT that costs $2 to make, and then it gets a text to get your glasses made, never seeing an optometrist? What about if you have a child where you don't know if it's an ear infection, and you have this Stethoscope device that gets a 10x magnification of the eardrum and automatic detection of that, immediately telling you whether your child needs antibiotics or not? These are transformative things, and having a big impact, will have a big impact, if not already, in the future of medicine. Being able to detect an asthma attack before it starts, or being able to use the breath and digitize it to see whether or not an individual is at risk for lung cancer. These pills from Proteus, they're digitized with this little digestible sensor, were just approved by the FDA, and they may be a striking way, coupled with a BandAid, which senses when the pill hits the stomach, when the signal is received, to then know exactly about adherence of medications, which is a big problem. And it's a very, I think, innovative way to track that. Then I met with John Rogers and Todd Coleman just before this session, and they are the ones who invented this remarkable skin chip shown here. This is, I think, striking how you could track motor activity, EEG, and ECG through this sort of skin tattoos, and even more recently, this whole idea of digitizing a finger with this pulsatile or palpable feature, really striking advances from the University of Illinois, Urbana, and John Rogers and his colleagues. What about this idea of being able to continuously sense intraocular pressure? This is already available in Europe, Sensimed, for those individuals who suffer from glaucoma that's not particularly well treated. Or digitizing vision using wireless implants. an iBorg type cyborg, if you will. And the idea of digitizing the brain for someone who's paralyzed to be able to move things. This is, of course, a great triumph, as recently reported this spring. So the whole idea is that we will have smart medical homes, and we won't have the need for hospitals unless people are critically ill in an intensive care unit, or if they need an operation or procedure. George Orwell once said that hospitals are the antechamber to the tomb. And really, it's not so different today. And they're awfully expensive. And we can do all this monitoring in one's home, a lot more conveniently, inexpensively, and safely. And then, of course, there's clinics. Why do we have to have all these face-to-face visits when most of these can be done transferring the data in real time or in advance of the visit and done through video links such as Skype, FaceTime, or secure video chatting? So I also want to mention about the genomic side of all this, because that's equally as exciting. And that's, of course, understanding the sequence. The sequence, we used to have to rely on these very expensive platforms, costing anywhere from $600,000 to $900,000 with proprietary reagents. And that has quickly changed to things like nanopore and electronic sequencing, making it so much cheaper. Here with the nanopore device, the idea is that in a USB-sized device, one could get, without any sample prep, sequence by the end of this year within 2-3 hours. That's 6 billion letters of a genome, 40x, so about a quarter of a billion letters, excuse me, a quarter of a trillion letters. And so this is the device hooked up to a laptop, and this is what it is allowed to do. Not that device, but sequencing. This is a boy in Milwaukee who was the first individual who was noted to have sequencing save a life. He was in really desperate shape. He'd been in the hospital for a couple of years continuously, septic, in a hyperbaric chamber at times, with over almost 100 surgical procedures. And so finally, his pediatricians in Milwaukee said, well, why don't we sequence? We've never seen any individual with this type of presentation. And they found the mutation, and he got effective treatment. This is Nicholas Volker today, perfectly healthy 6-year-old boy. And this is a great story which has now had many similar, albeit anecdotes, but many more to reinforce that sequencing can indeed save a life and crack a case of so-called idiopathic, or we don't know the reason why someone would be so sick. We've been applying sequencing to understand healthy aging, what we call the elderly. And we're in the midst of whole genome sequencing, 1,000 people who've never been sick, who are well into their 9th decade of life on no chronic medications. And just recently, for example, a protective mutation was found in a group of individuals sequenced in Iceland that protects against Alzheimer's, one of the most important diseases of man. And this is the kind of thing that's just striking, because 25 individuals who had at least a 10-fold, almost 100% risk of developing Alzheimer's were protected fully from this mutation in the gene APP, amyloid precursor protein. Genomics is having a big impact in cancer, and it's no longer a war on cancer, it's a war on specific mutations. And so, for example, here's a comprehensive mutation assessment across 270 people with colon cancer, each with a distinct set of somatic mutations. No two people have the same cancer, and it's so silly for us to talk about cancer of this organ or that organ, because there's lots of different common ground between one and another. But when you know the mutation, here is a usually fatal condition, malignant melanoma. You know the mutation in this gene called BRAF. You give an oral drug, and there's a PET scan with riddled of cancer metastasis. Within 2 weeks, there's no evidence of any cancer when you can direct the therapy precisely like this. And this has been replicated across several other cancers, like here, this one of a brain tumor, medulloblastoma. Within 2 weeks, no evidence whatsoever of cancer by scanning. We have drugs today that are the 3 top drugs used in the world for sales, all against rheumatoid arthritis, And only 40% of people at most respond to these drugs. Why don't we find that out? Genomics could help us do that. There are drugs that will prevent clotting of a stent when it's put in, such as clopidogrel. But we don't routinely check the genotype for the third of people who don't respond, who can't even metabolize the drug Plavix, now generically known clopidogrel. And then we can sequence, of course, the fetal genome, even in the first trimester. Just think of the implications of that. Or the fact that now human sperm have been sequenced. We understand these so-called de novo mutations. And that has now led to the very impressive paper from last week that some of autism and schizophrenia is due to the father's age. The fact that there's more de novo mutations of the father. We always would think of the mother with the biological clock, but it applies equally as important, perhaps even more, to the father. And then there's the microbiome, which has an extraordinary amount of importance, and that's been recognized in these magazines just in recent weeks. And the fact that these commensal bacteria that we changed radically when we give someone antibiotics, for example, these are the sorts of things that could have a big connection to obesity, diabetes, and many other chronic conditions of man we're just learning about now. So this whole idea of sequencing, the stethoscope, which is the way to go, it's kind of this cartoon. I do want to mention the stethoscope, invented by René Laennec in 1816, is becoming obsolete. That's hard to believe. This is the icon of medicine. But what's interesting about the stethoscope, this is the college students that actually came up with a digital stethoscope that could diagnose pneumonia through the web anywhere remotely. But moreover is a new replacement, a true stethoscope that is look at something rather than listen. The stethoscope of today fits in the pocket of a white coat better than the stethoscope. And let you see the images of the heart that you can get within seconds. Why would you listen to lub-dub when you can get high-resolution echo, which we've recently shown is as good a quality, a resolution, as the one you get in the $300,000 big echo machine in the hospital. This is what you get in a normal heart, and here's a patient with a weak heart cardiomyopathy. You see a completely different picture. You can track blood flow. This is a remarkable device. It isn't being used so much in the United States because of issues of reimbursement, but it's very popular in countries like Brazil and India and China, where reimbursement is not the issue, but trying to take better care of patients with this advanced in imaging portable technology is the center. And of course, things like what was reported last week, the ability to make embedded tissue with chips. And this was shown just last week, a very impressive Nature Materials paper you probably are familiar with. And then, of course, the concept of fusing these things, that is genomics and wireless, brings us to heart attack. Heart attack is a big issue still today with the principal cause of death in the Western world, heart disease. It's due to a crack in the artery wall. We have no way to predict that. Who's going to crack? Where is the crack going to occur? And the case that is so illustrative here is Tim Russert, who died of a massive heart attack while at the NBC studio back in June 2008. And he, at autopsy, had a crack in the artery, one of the three principal arteries of his heart. We now have been working throughout San Diego to collect the blood from people with the early hours and minutes of a heart attack. And we have found the cells that are shed from the artery wall in the blood. Not only are they at great increase in quantity, but they're completely dysmorphic, as you see here, with multiple nuclei and clusters. And these cells have been sequenced, have a very remarkable profile, gene expression and somatic mutations, and they can be developed, we believe, into a blood test to diagnose these shedding cells in the artery, from the artery, that would be the precursor to a heart attack. And then we have the idea of this embedded sensor like you have in your car. Why don't we treat our bodies as equal priority as our cars with sensors? And so this brings up the potential of putting a sensor in the blood, like here pictured the Stanford group recently showed. We've been working with the Caltech group, Axel Scherer and his colleagues, to develop a nanosensor the size of smaller than a grain of sand. And the whole idea is that it would talk this to it will pick up the signal from these shed arterial cells through the nanosensor in the blood, and then it will get a ringtone, the heart attack ringtone. It will tell you, well, you got a heart attack in the next week or two if you don't do something about it. The same could be equally applied to cancer cells, first time in the blood, to islet cell autoantibodies for diabetes, or for donor DNA showing up in the blood to detect transplant rejection. So I'll leave you with this you probably know well because you're probably working on getting the prize, the $10 million X prize. Somebody in this room ought to win this prize. This is the tricorder of the future to make rapid diagnosis by the individual of himself or herself. We'll see how that goes over the next few years. So just to leave you with the sense that we are practicing today largely old medicine. But this medicine can be transformed not just because we have a digital infrastructure, which is finally about to invade the medical cocoon. I've reviewed the salient features of it, but also that we have these wireless sensors, genomics, imaging, and of course health information systems. Together, this sets up a super convergence, the likes of which we've never seen in our history, and hopefully that will get us to this new precision and participatory medicine, and that is really, I think, remarkably exciting. And so I leave you with this sense, the future is bright, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Eric, for this marvelous lecture and also live demonstrations. It's really inspiring and exciting to show the future of medicine by digitizing the human beings. Any questions for Dr. Topol? Yes, please. There's a microphone there. Would everyone say your name and affiliation before the question?
Warren Smith, California State University, Sacramento. Thank you very much. You said that practicing clinicians were unaware of these internet capabilities. Are you in touch with what's happening to the medical school curricula? Are students coming in and changing the teachers?
Yeah, it's a great point. There's only 140 or so medical schools in the United States, and the curriculum to change in most of them is like an extraordinary difficult affair, taking years. And so there's only a few medical schools that are tuned into social networking, really, because of the time it takes to go through all the different layers of curriculum renewal or change. So it is what you're getting at. The students themselves are driving this. They are digital natives. We are the digital immigrants. And they're driving this, and they're, I think, teaching the faculty how the world is changing. But unfortunately, the people that set the curriculum are not the ones that understand the potential impact here. And the fact that it could very much contribute, I didn't even mention this, but there have already been accounts on Facebook and other social networks of posting a picture or posting the data and getting a diagnosis, and claims of parents that their child was saved by things like that. So it's going to contribute more and more to the future of medicine. Hopefully, medical schools will catch up with that. And as you aptly point out, it's from the young folks that are going to drive it.
Any other questions? Please come to the microphone.
Yeah.
Paolo Bonato from Harvard Medical School. First of all, I'm really sorry you guys closed the library. You can come to Boston if you guys want to. But besides that, that's a joke, obviously. I was wondering, you have a great group of engineers here, right? If you had all of them available to you at this point in time, right? In contrast to what you did during the presentation, which was very broad, lots of different applications, neurological, cardiovascular, cardiopulmonary, right? If you wanted to tackle a major problem and you had everybody in this room available to you, what would you ask?
Well, it's a great question. I got so many for you. I mean, there's several that you could think of straight away. One of the ones I was talking about with John Rogers before we got started was we need a sensor that can pick up the fluid status, the core fluid status of an individual, so we can prevent heart failure Heart failure readmissions to the hospital is the biggest problem we have in terms of readmissions. It accounts for, double-digit billions of dollars per year. Almost 50% of people with heart failure are readmitted within 6 months, 27% within 30 days. So we need something like that, and we haven't gotten anything yet. Another one I would ask for is a sensor that can detect the calories we take in accurately. We don't have one for that yet. And we have this obesity, diabetes epidemic that's a global, profound phenomenon. I'd like to see an asthma sensor that picks up all the key metrics like forced expiratory volume, the pollen count, the air quality, the respiratory rate, the oximetry, the chest movement, all those things in a panel of sensors to predict asthma attacks, because we have children dying every day from an asthma attack that should be preventable. I can go on and on, but we have so many unmet needs and so many brilliant people here. Hopefully, maybe you're already on it. If you have any great ideas, I'd certainly love to hear from you.
So you outlined very nicely about the meta shift from the population to the individual. How do you envision the regulatory process, the regulatory paradigm changing, which is effectively a population-based concept?
So this is a great question. There's always the worry that you have all this fantastic innovation, and then the bottleneck wouldn't get to patients because of regulatory FDA considerations. I've been encouraged by that because just in the last couple of weeks when this Proteus digitized pill was approved, that to me was a sign that the FDA is supportive, because we've never had pills with a chip in them before. And the fact that that would be approved across putting that in any pill, that's pretty striking. So I think there's, the people I've spoken with at FDA are very excited about this space that we've just been reviewing, but the idea of individualized precision medicine. So I think you'll be seeing much more support of that, much smaller clinical trials, much easier, faster times from the ideation, the design, the clinical trial to approval in the future. And that's my hope, and I think we have some early signs that we're going to go that way.
But in a scientific sense, in terms of the regulatory approval, you have randomized clinical trials for population-based drugs. What is the scientific criteria, the scientific process for underlying an approval of an individualized treatment? Right.
Yeah, so I'm not so much thinking that randomized trials are going to be the main agenda going forward. We could do small randomized trials, but the point is, from each individual, we're going to get more data than we ever were able to get before. If you're doing a trial on blood pressure, who ever had access to a blood pressure minute by minute around the clock, for days, weeks, months on end, as an example? So we have such exquisite amount of data collection on each individual. I don't know that we're going to need randomized trials. Depends on the indication. Like, for example, if you have a drug in cancer, and it's very specific to the mutation that is considered the driver mutation in the pathway, it's very, to me, difficult about the ethics of doing randomized trials. So the idea of having this remarkable matchup between collecting the data and then something that is specifically targeting that individual's biologic or physiologic metric, that to me is a whole different way to go forward. So now we're talking about series of N of 1 studies rather than randomized trials. I'd love to see the end of randomized trials unless they're very small, because I think they become prohibitively expensive, usually negative and a bust, and it's just too much effort and takes too long to get promising, whether it's diagnostics, treatments, or preventive strategies to fruition.
Andrew Cameron, University of Waterloo. You talked about having smartphone-enabled applications, giving a lot of data to the individual and having them perform some sort of self-diagnosis. Do you foresee any negative consequences of giving that much medical data to a layman who isn't trained to perform that sort of diagnosis? And how can we address those issues?
I'm really glad you asked that question. So I know this sounds a little crazy, but I see the era that we're moving into to be equivalent to Gutenberg and the printing press. The physicians have acted for since the beginning of medicine as the high priest. It's highly paternalistic. Doctor knows best. But when people can read their own data, and they have the most vested interest, they can learn to read really quickly. Most people are interested in their health when they have their own data and information. And so this is a whole different look. This is from a history of information asymmetry to one of information parity. It's true empowerment of individuals with their data and information. Not that they couldn't be their own doctor. They still need to partner with a doctor for guidance and judgment and their experience. But for the first time, all the data of themselves essentially will be available. Most of it, of course, via smartphones. So this is a whole new look that we've never seen in medicine before. And I think it's something that will change the people expectations, just as having books in the 1400s changed the ability of people to read. Most people are very interested in their health, given the information. That's been my experience to date. But the medical profession isn't necessarily supportive of that idea, because that relinquishes to some degree the control. And so this is going to take some consumer-driven healthcare revolution stuff to make this happen.
Well, I have a long question, but I'm going to start with a short one. Did you believe your hypnogram when you saw it? Did you show the results of your hypnogram or of your sleep analysis? Did you believe the results?
Did I believe the results?
Yeah. Did you trust the results of your hypnogram?
Of which program?
Of your sleep analysis.
Oh yeah, do I trust? Oh yeah, absolutely. No, the Zio brain, what you're talking about? Yeah, because it's been compared to an EEG, head to head. So I believe the data are...
That device specifically has been compared to a doctor's analysis. Yes. Okay, that might be an exception. But I think that the main problem of the devices that you presented here is that they look very nice in principle, but in reality, there is no validation. There is no clinical validation of these devices. And it is not difficult to get the wireless connectivity. That's trivial nowadays. At least wireless connectivity for a couple of hours. That is obviously the low power problem. The problem is that all these wearable devices are so susceptible to artifacts that in reality, any automatic analysis is really, really hard to do. And I think that's where the problem lies, not in the device itself.
I understand your cynicism. I couldn't hear it well, but what I would say is that every device has to be validated in clinical trials. Every device. Otherwise, I don't pay attention to it. I didn't present any device today that I don't believe has at least some validation. Of course, it always can get more. So I understand your skepticism, but I'm not advocating that we ever accept the use of a device until it's been validated in people.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that the technologies that you presented, the electronic devices, most of the technologies are not there yet. They will be, but they seem to be finalized products, whereas they are not.
Do you understand what you say? I couldn't hear. Okay.
Yeah.
Whatever you say.
Okay.
Okay.
How do you think we can change the legal structure in this country and other countries to facilitate adapting new technology and adapting to all these technological changes?
The legal structure of, you mean?
Well, for instance, to encourage people to adapt the new stethoscope, as you mentioned.
Oh, right. Okay, so it's very hard to make doctors do anything. So you can't put a law out there, you have to use this instead of the stethoscope. It's a problem. That's one of the issues that you're bringing up is there are going to be lots of legal entanglements here, not necessarily about how do you change practice, but when you start to cross the new boundaries. So for example, when you can have the sequence of your child, and then your child grows up, and says, well, why did you do this to me? And you're the parents. And so what is the right of that individual? And there's going to have to be, where legally the issues have come up and been starting to be addressed is much more on the genomic side than has been on these physiologic metric monitoring or the use of these particular devices. But usually in medicine, rather than a legal enforcement, if you will, or structure, it's more what is the best practice, the standard of care. And that basically is what governs and sets up the kind of standards for lack of ideal or malpractice. So we'll see how that evolves over time.
Leslie DeLashmitz from here in San Diego. These devices all require software to produce the results. How do you propose we prove the software is correct?
Right, that's where the FDA has their purview and has to, of course, review that in depth, but that's critical. There's not just the software, it's also the processing of the data. So all the signal processing so that, when this data is filtered, it makes it practical. So it isn't just your point of the software, the algorithm, but also what are going to be immense data sets. If you get every blood pressure and multiple metrics, vital signs, for every minute for an undue period of time, just think about that data, no less all the other things we can get. So the idea of validating the software is it's a system. And your point is a really invaluable one. It isn't just that the sensor's working, but the software, the algorithm's working, and the ability to process what is, for each individual, immense data, that it's all done in an authentic way. So these are challenges. And we haven't even talked about aggregating sensors and algorithms and pulling this all together, which is eventually, of course, where this will go. So I'm glad you touched on that. Very important.
Yeah, I have to admit that I kind of baited you on that question. I'm a software engineer, and I actually have a proposal for how to deal with that.
Yeah, well, that's great. We need it. Thank you. Okay.
Let us thank Dr. Topol again for his stimulating, exciting, inspiring lecture. Before we close the session, I'd like to invite our conference chair, Dr. Michael Koo, to present to Dr. Topol some gifts. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now the session is closed. Thank you very much for your participation.